Hi, welcome to Freedom Talk. I'm glad to welcome today Mr. Grant Stinchfield. He's a longtime conservative talk show host for both Newsmax and NRATV. He does the morning drive in Los Angeles on AM 870, The Answer. He also calls himself a small-time capitalist as he continues to buy, build, and sell numerous businesses. Welcome to Freedom Talk. Grant Stinchfield, it's good to see you again.
Kelly, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on today.
Excellent. Yes. I've been following some of the things you've been talking about, and obviously our nation is in a place we've never seen it before. I've personally never seen this country in greater danger than it's in now. But I know that you've been talking about this idea that some people are putting out there of a civil war, of secession, those types of things. You had some interesting things to say about that.
Yeah, look, Lindsey Graham just over the weekend, Senator Lindsey Graham had said that if they go ahead and indict President Trump, which I wouldn't put him past them to doing, even we know that he didn't do anything wrong, but I wouldn't put it past the left in indicting President Trump. But Lindsey Graham said if they did, we could see rioting in the streets. That may or may not be true. There are others out there that say we could face a civil war. And I certainly feel that the government is pushing us in a direction to a point where we all feel like breaking. I don't feel, though, that we are at the point of a civil war. And one of the things that was so powerful for me, I just spent the weekend in Tennessee, and I got to visit the Battle of Shiloh, the Shiloh battlefield along the Tennessee River in Tennessee. And what an unbelievable place to visit. 3,200 Americans lost their lives fighting each other, may I remind you. So those are more Americans than we lost on September 11th, more Americans than we lost in the war in Afghanistan on one battlefield during the Civil War in one state in Tennessee. I walked through the graveyard there where there were Americans, Union soldiers, Confederate soldiers buried side by side. That is not a place where we want America to be. I certainly understand why people might think we would get to a place like that, but I don't think we're there yet. And I'll also offer this up. Something very different between the Civil War back then and what I feel like we face now. We had Americans fighting Americans back then. The North hated the South hated the North for all these different reasons. That's a different show of why we went to Civil War. What we see now, though, I believe, is half of America feels like going to war not against fellow Americans, but against their government. This government has become tyrannical. It almost reminds me more of the Revolutionary War and what we faced against the tyrannical England than it does in the Civil War of what we faced Americans fighting Americans. Now, there's no doubt that the Democrats and the Republicans are far apart on so many issues. There's a huge divide in here, but I don't feel like I walk down the street and think that, a conservative wearing a Make America Great Again hat somehow wants to go fight the Black Lives Matter guy in the grocery store. I don't think anybody wants to fight like that and have physical violence. But I do believe this government and the leaders of the Democrat Party, because there's a big distinction between those who just vote Democrat. They're blind liberal zombies. They've been duped. They've been tricked. And they may be well-intentioned, wildly wrong, maybe well-intentioned. The leaders of the Democratic Party are not well-intentioned. They're devious. And I believe Satan's work is at play inside them. They're demonic with their actions against us. And, of course, President Trump.
Right. And they're not the Democratic Party of old, that's for sure. They've gone so far left that everyone to the right of far left, they're calling alt-right. But really, I'm seeing more and more people who were traditional Democrats, who were maybe classical liberals, who've come together with others like you and I, and are saying, look, we don't want any part of this. I know I have a friend who's a gay atheist who's turned conservative. And he said, I never thought I'd be in this place, but he just sees, because of everything that's happened with the pandemic, how that happened, whether the assault on children, it's gone beyond the pale of even common sense.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that we see from the left is they are trying to androgynize America. When you look at this transgender nonsense, the entire goal is to take men out of the household. We've been facing this for a very, very long time. So, you talk about people that are coming over to the Republican Party. Another demographic is black men. black men see that they have literally been banished from the household. The Democrat Party is using them. And then you see the disappearance of men and the androgenization of America. When you look at the transgender nonsense, it's another reason why they're coming over to the Republican side. And look, when I say androgenization of America, there's a long history of this. If you go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, you look at the statues in the beginning of those societies, they were big, giant men, Greek gods, muscular, strong, godlike individuals. And then as you saw that society progress and ultimately collapse, what did we see? Just go look at any museum. Their statues become whimsical, like these fairy-like men that are holding flowers. And ultimately the society collapsed because they androgenized society and they took away men in society altogether. And so I think that's what's at play right now on the left, so they can take ultimate control.
Excuse me, I was just commenting to my wife yesterday. We try to stay away from Target now because of some of the stances they've taken, which I think are horrific. But I needed a certain product I can only find there. And I went in and I remarked to my wife afterwards, even the mannequins, the male mannequins, had a certain femininity about them. And I didn't appreciate that. It's an attack on my gender. It's an attack on masculinity. But Grant, I think they want to get men out of the way because we are the biggest obstacle. We are supposed to be the leaders of families, loving leaders, of course, leaders of society. And if they get men out of the way, if they erase men, it's going to be much easier for them to steamroll all of society.
And think about that goes back to this idea of civil war that so many people are talking about. Again, I want to make it clear. I don't want America going to civil war. That's a really bad place. I believe our weapons are our minds. I believe the Constitution is a viable weapon to fight back against the left and ultimately win. So I don't want to get there. But if you talk about civil war, one reason why they want to take away our guns and take away men is because those are the two things that we would use most to go back and fight against a tyrannical government. And I'll raise this. I raise the question to police officers, and I love law enforcement. I wear a law enforcement pin on my lapel every time I broadcast. But I raise the question. You need to decide right now what you are going to do when your city, town, or state gives you an unconstitutional order to engage in some kind of tyrannical behavior on your citizens. Will you comply with that order or will you not comply? And if you're in law enforcement, you need to come up with that decision now before you're put in the position of coming up with that order. Now, when you talk about a civil war, and if this is a civil war, not against other Americans, but the right against a government that is tyrannical, literally imprisoning us, going after our former president as if this is a regime. This is not a constitutional republic anymore. It acts like a regime. So if you're a member of our military or you're a federal agent that could get caught up in this, I would ask you, what are you going to do? Would you really take up arms against a society that is fed up for unconstitutional orders? I hope we never get to that spot. I don't want to get to that spot. But if you're a member of the military or federal law enforcement, you better come up with your decision right now. What are you going to do if you're put in that position? And sadly, I don't think it's too far out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I'm down here in the trenches, and I would go to the school board meetings and some of the protests and things like that. And I've had these one-on-one conversations with officers, and I've always backed the blue as well. I have a number of friends in any branch of law enforcement you can imagine, but I've had that direct conversation. If it comes down to the government versus the people, you swore an oath to the Constitution, not to the people, quote unquote, in charge. And I have seen some make, I think, the wrong decision. I watched a school mom from down here in Southern Arizona be sentenced to 5 days in jail simply for questioning the quarantine on her daughter. And I think the officers knew it was wrong. I think a lot of people knew it was wrong, but the judge and the school principal wanted to set an example, so that is worrisome. And you like to hope that people in law enforcement, I know a lot of really good ones who would put their lives on the line for the country, but you would hope if it came down to the people versus a tyrannical government that they would make the right decision. But I don't know. And we also have officers who lost their jobs or quit because of the mandates. And who's filled that vacuum? Who's filled their place? I've had that conversation with some police officers. Man, I don't want to do these things, but if I go who's going to be here to stand up for the country.
Well,
So it's problematic.
Kelly, think about what you just spelled out. So we saw everywhere from Arizona and Texas to even Los Angeles, clearly where I do radio, so many police officers forced off the job, firemen forced off the job because they refused to comply with this mandate. This wasn't about the mandate. It wasn't about being safety. It wasn't for their best interest. I actually feel that the reason they forced those people who would not comply is because that was an easy way to get the critical thinkers off of the force, those free spirits off of the force. If you're going to issue unconstitutional orders to an entire police force, well, you can't have free thinkers, and you can't have critical thinkers, and you can't have those who support individual rights in the Constitution on that police force. What better way to get them off the force than kick them out over some kind of bogus vaccine mandate, when in the end, you just didn't want these individual thinkers on the force anymore?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's very similar with the military. And it's very concerning to see that, because who are you left with? And so it becomes a situation where the ones who stand up for what's right, the ones who stand up for the Constitution, could be gone. So I've been really studying into the words of the founding fathers and getting back to this idea that power trickles down, well, up from the bottom, not down from the top, and that we need to be community led. There's one thing I learned from watching the left, with Chaz and Chop and all these things, is they were very good at taking ownership of their community and communicating with the authorities and saying, look, these are our values, these are our standards. They did it in a demented way, but I think we can do that in a really positive way and say, look, this is our community. We're not going to have certain things in our community. We're in a place right now where we have one elderly man at the top and his handlers telling everyone what to do now. And to me, that's backwards. This is not what our nation was founded on.
Well, I read an article today that talked about exactly what you're spelling out there. And it really did go through how what we're living in is the likes of a regime, not a constitutional republic. And so what happens when you have a regime in power? They've got to be really worried about who they can trust on the inside, who they can trust in the military. In a regime, you start to get factions. Can I trust this general? Can I trust that general? Will this standing army turn against this army? And then even inside law enforcement, can I trust these FBI agents or these FBI agents? And that's what we're seeing right now, especially being on display with this unconstitutional raid on President Trump's home. They don't know who they can trust inside the FBI as far as these bad actors versus good ones and bad ones, evil versus good. This all plays out in third world countries when regimes are in power. It is not supposed to play out like this in the United States of America, but this is where Democrats have brought us.
And to further complicate matters, we talk about voting Republican, and yet we have some Republicans, Liz Cheney, for example, Republican in name only, who seem to be as much or if not more of a problem than the left.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest criticisms are establishment Republicans. Before President Trump came into office and coined them the deep state, I called them a ruling class of career bureaucrats and politicians. This ruling class in Washington that was so ingrained. It's the same group of people, just a different name. But they do act like a ruling class, and that is not governing for the people or by the people. And so, yes, we have some in our own party, Mitch McConnell being one of them, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and others like Mitt Romney and so many inside government that are not doing the right thing. They'd rather get back to the business of lining their own pockets, putting self-interest over national interest every day of the week. And President Trump upended that apple cart, which is why they hated him so much, why so many Republicans in Washington hated him so much, because he was exposing that ruling class of career bureaucrats.
Right. And deep state sounds so black helicopter, tinfoil hat, but really it's just the fact that our country is run by a non-elected administration. It has proliferated to the point where they're controlling every aspect of our lives. Grant, how do we reverse that? I know Jeffrey Tucker, Brownstone Institute, talks a lot about his concerns about this administrative state, these non-elected bureaucrats that just get entrenched, and it's very difficult to get them out of that seat. It's very difficult to fire them. In your view, how do we solve this? How do we push this back?
So it's obviously very hard. President Trump tried and really wasn't even very successful at rooting out the deep state. I think it starts with individual members of Congress. So, so many people, you've spoken to them, they run for Congress, they're well-intentioned, they have the Tea Party, America First mentality, and they go up there, and then what happens? They get swamp fever, and it sets in very quickly. And they go up, and here's the problem. The first problem that happens when they go to Washington, they hire the staffers that have been working in Washington for years. Oh, well, they know how Washington operates. They know their way around the Capitol. I don't care. Stay away from those people as much as possible. If you've got, people you trust in Tucson, Arizona, and you go to Washington, bring those people with you. I promise you, get a map. You can learn your way around the Capitol building. You don't need these Washington insiders to be working on your staff, because those are the people that are telling these fresh, bushy-tailed, and bright-eyed congressmen and women that go up there how to get things done, and it's not. It's a devious trick. It's going back to the old ways of that ruling class of bureaucrats that are just, paid government insiders that are not working for us. So I think that's the first thing that congressmen need to do, is get rid of their staff. How are you going to do it inside every agency unless you're doing it on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, for sure. It almost tempts one to think of changing the Capitol and starting fresh somewhere else. And I think in the history of Washington, D.C., that literally that land was a swamp that was drained. And when I first heard the term drain the swamp, I thought they were alluding to that. But it's a morass there. And I don't know if it's fixable. And here at the local level, I think let's get the power back into the hands of the people. Let's stand up for ourselves, for our rights. I think the thing they fear the most is that people are going to find out, be onto what they're doing, and start to learn about their history, what this country was built upon, and start asserting that's individual sovereignty and community sovereignty. I like where that could go. I mean, it's a battle, but it's sort of that Bug's Life, ants versus grasshoppers kind of thing. So I don't know if anybody knows where exactly this is going. And I have to agree with you. I think civil war would be devastating and tragic. I think it's easy for people to stand up and talk about that. But
I don't say this lightly, and it's kind of jokingly, but not. If it was conservatives versus liberals in the Civil War, the liberals don't stand a chance. They don't know how to use guns. They don't have guns. They don't know how to really fight. They're not self-sufficient on their own. They don't have the winning mindset. I mean, we would steamroll them, okay? The problem is that's not the Civil War we're going to face, because they're not going to fight us. Not that we want to fight them, which we don't. Anybody listening, I'm not saying that we want to fight anybody. Only that if it got to that point, it wouldn't be a fair fight. We would literally steamroll them. They just don't have it in them. If we got to the point of fighting the federal government, though, guess who gets steamrolled? Probably us. I don't know if we're going to be able to take on the federal government. I mean, that would be a disaster if you had Americans fighting the United States Marines or an army, because that's who we're angry with right now, is our federal government. So we've got to do this to be smarter than the left. We've got to do this by using the Constitution, by using the court system. The Democrats have been brilliant at using the court system. That's where the battleground needs to be waged, inside the courts. Every single time they do something that is out of the bounds of the Constitution, we need to be hauling them into court and making their life miserable and dragging this out forever. That's what they do to us. So let's make that happen sooner than later. But we've got to start fighting in that manner. We seem to roll over. The Democrats are willing to cheat. When you're willing to cheat, it makes it very easy to win. We're not willing to cheat. So that's fine. If we're not willing to cheat, but then we better get a little dirty, and we better get willing to get a little dirty. When I say that, but getting our hands dirty by going into court, spending the money needed, raise money so we can fund some of these lawsuits, and let's take our country back that way as a first try.
Hey guys, I want to take a quick break to tell you about Freedom Talk Coffee. This is some amazingly good coffee, and I'm a little biased because Andrea roasts each batch lovingly for you, and you're going to know that our coffee doesn't go to fund woke agendas. You're actually helping support the work that we do with Freedom Talk to restore American values on the foundation of natural rights, to fight for your freedom, to restore our country So we really appreciate if you subscribe monthly, annually, or even make a one-time purchase. What did you put in this coffee? Coffee plus. And one of my big concerns is that, the left uses the government. The left uses that power. They've got their hooks into the FBI, some of the other agencies, and defending the people who are in office, some of whom are very, very corrupt. So I agree, use the courts. And sometimes that seems a bit of a crapshoot because it depends on the judge you get. Who are they appointed by? What is their ideology? How do we combat ideological judges who are legislating from the bench?
Well, sadly, the only way to do it is either elect them out of office if they're elected judges. If they're appointed judges, on federal positions, they're there for life, which is why President Trump really did an amazing job of transforming the justice system. You look at the Ninth Circuit Court out there in the western half of the country. That was one of the worst liberal courts on the face of the earth. It's not perfect now, but it's certainly improved thanks to President Trump. So we've got to win elections. And then, of course, you talk about this all the time. We've got to get back to election integrity. I don't think we've done what we needed on that front. So, we can talk about this, but if we don't have free and fair elections, we're never going to win another one of them. And again, this is the Democrats. This mail-in ballot scheme, I'm telling you, they're still back at it again for the midterms. They'll be back at it in 2024. It is an absolute scheme, the mail-in ballots. That allows them to do all kinds of things to rig elections. And we've got to stop them from being able to do that. Look, the old way was you show up to your poll, you vote. And the fact that people don't want to show ID to vote and all these things to make sure the people who are voting are the people that say they're voting, they're very simple things. But the left doesn't want to engage in them because they have ulterior motives. They have devious intentions. And if you don't believe it, there's no other way else to explain it.
Right. And as you know, Arizona is a big battleground right now. We've got Kerry Lake, Blake Masters, Eli Crane, Abe Hamady, Mark Fincham, all of these American First candidates running. There's a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, but hanging over that is a pall of what are the Democrats going to do? How are they going to try to cheat? Are we going to get a fair election?
Look, Arizona is a great example, Kelly, of a lot of talk from Republican lawmakers about election integrity and what they're doing at the state capitol. I've looked at what they did in Arizona. They did not go far enough when it comes to election integrity. I got a lot of wind and not a lot of action there. Now they passed a couple laws, but I still really fear the election system in Arizona is not secure yet.
Yeah, we feel that way too, and there was some frustration here because there were some people fighting hard for election integrity. First off, to question the 2020 election, the presidential election, but then secondly, for election reform, because some people said, well, we can't change the results of the 2020 election. There was a fight over that because some people said we need to. But even in terms of reforming the system, we've gotten resistance here. And I think a lot of it has come from those rhinos, those establishment people who really want to see the status quo stay in place. It's been frustrating for people of Arizona to see that.
Yeah, and it's not just Arizona. You got the same thing happening in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. These are battleground states. I live in Texas, and so I love my red state of Texas, but we're only a few years away from turning purple and, God forbid, blue. If that happens, we lose this country. We better have election integrity in place in Texas. My friends in Florida will make fun of me because of Greg Abbott, the Republican governor here, who's been squishy on some issues. He's not a bad guy, but he's been squishy. They say how great Florida is. But let me tell you something about Florida. Florida is a frog's hair away from being a blue state. It's not purple Florida. It's either red or it's blue. That's it. And Look, that election in that state is going to be by the skin of its teeth. So we look at Florida as this red state and all the freedom thanks to Ron DeSantis. One election, that goes poof in Florida. So that's what I offer up to my friends in Florida. I said, at least Texas, I feel like we've got a few more years left before we get to that situation.
State. Well, I created Freedom Talk to contribute, at least in some small way, to rebuilding the foundation of this country, because we've had our kids taught this warped view of history. We have people ashamed of their own country, and we really need to get people seeing again why this country is great. how the founding fathers weren't perfect, but their ideas were a culmination of hundreds, if not thousands, of years of a quest for freedom, and people are willing to throw that away. I see, Prager University, the Epic Times, a lot of others doing this kind of thing. And I think this is something we need to do at the community level. We need to teach our children about their country, teach our children how government works. Especially, we need to teach our kids about the evils of communism and Marxism, because communism is an ideology that's killed more people, murdered in mass numbers, more people than any other ideology. And yet, for you and me, who went through the Cold War, we're looking at people now flirting with communism, thinking that it could be a good thing. And it's horrifying, because we know where it leads. There's no question. Human nature hasn't changed.
And with that, let me just remind you, I agree with you. The founding fathers were unbelievable. Their foresight in how to handle situations was unbelievable. The only place where they faltered was term limits. We needed term limits. It takes a constitutional amendment to make that happen. I just don't think they envisioned jet airplanes shuttling politicians back and forth every weekend to Washington. You had to ride a horse from Maine to D.C. Who was going to do that for 50 years of their life? But that's the only place I can find where they've actually faltered. So one last little point here I want to make. Just because we take votes and we take polls, it does not mean that the majority is always right. And we've got to be really, really careful about this. The Constitution is clear about freedoms. Just because the majority wants to encroach on a freedom doesn't mean that encroachment is right. And so the example I use right now is an AR assault ban, an AR-15 style rifle ban. 50-something% of the country supports that idea. That's a majority of the country, but that is not a good idea, and it goes against the Constitution. You can go back to slavery. There were states where the majority of those states supported the idea of slavery. Well, it clearly wasn't a good idea, and it was unconstitutional. So just because the majority wants something doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's legal, and certainly doesn't mean it's constitutional.
Well, I think that's the difference between a mob-ruled democracy like you saw in some of the Greek city-states and a republic, which Rome had pretty well down for a while until that fell apart. But just the idea that the Constitution, the law, protects people so that the majority, who may not be right in spite of their numbers, doesn't necessarily constantly rule and oppress the minority. And I agree with you. I think that's very important. Grant, where can people get in touch with you? Where can they follow you? We want to keep up with what you're doing these days.
I would love Stinchfield 1776 on just about every social media outlet out there, from Twitter and Instagram and those places, Truth Social, Getter, Stinchfield 1776. Please subscribe to both the YouTube channel and a Rumble channel. Just type in Grant Stinchfield. They should both come up. Stinchfield Uncensored on YouTube and Grant Stinchfield on Rumble. Those are great places to follow me. And I got some big announcements coming up pretty soon about what we're doing after the Newsmax days. We got big plans, so there's a teaser for you. Follow me on social media. That announcement soon.
That's fantastic, Grant. We really appreciate the work you're doing. You're a true American warrior. Thanks for coming on today. Really appreciate you.
Well, the feeling is mutual, Kelly. You keep up the fight as well, and I know you will. And it's always great talking to you and coming on with you. And thank you, everyone out there. God bless your viewers.
Likewise.